Imagine discovering that your entire life can crumble in just 15 seconds. That's exactly what happens when you're caught in a compromising situation in front of 60,000 people, and the video goes viral within hours. My name is Andy Byron, CEO of the billion-dollar tech company Astronomer, and this is the story of how a simple kiss cam transformed my existence into public hell. What started as a night of entertainment became the biggest scandal of my career, destroyed my 15-year marriage, and forced me to confront truths about myself that I had been avoiding for a long time. Have you ever wondered what the real price of success is? What if I told you that sometimes we lose our authenticity in the process of building our empires? If you want to discover how this story ends, subscribe to the channel now and comment which city you're watching from. I was at the Coldplay concert, trying to relax after intense weeks closing the CloudSync startup acquisition, when suddenly the camera focused on me and Kristin. The giant screen showed our faces to more than 60,000 people, and at that moment, I knew my life as I knew it was over. The crowd screamed expecting us to kiss as the kiss cam tradition demands, but all I could do was duck down like a coward while Kristin quickly turned her face away. What should have been just an embarrassing moment turned into the most viral nightmare of my life. In less than 2 hours, the video was already circulating on Twitter with over 100,000 views, and the comments were ruthless. Billionaire CEO cheating on wife live. Astronomer CEO caught cheating. Rich guy can't hide anymore. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Advisors, lawyers, journalists, even some board members. I tried to explain that it wasn't quite like that Kristin and I were just friends, but who would believe it? The images spoke for themselves, and our desperate reaction only confirmed what everyone was already thinking. Things got even more serious when I realized Megan had seen the video. She didn't call me, didn't text, didn't make a scene. She simply removed Byron from all her social media profiles. Megan Kerrigan. That's how she wanted to be known again, as if our 15 years of marriage had turned to smoke. When I got home that dawn, she was in the living room, sitting on the white sofa we bought together on our honeymoon in Italy, just looking at me with an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was pure disappointment. And that hurt much more than any screaming. The silence in that $6 million house was deafening. I stood there at the living room door, trying to find words that could explain the inexplicable. How do you tell the woman of your life that yes, you were developing feelings for another person? How do you admit that those casual meetings to discuss HR strategies had become something more intimate? The truth is, I didn't even know how to define what was happening between me and Kristin. Was it physical attraction? Was it just an escape from the suffocating routine of marriage? Was it emotional neediness? All I knew was that for the first time in years, I felt alive next to someone. The company I had spent 2 decades building was about to become a media circus. The next morning, Astronomer's stock opened down 8%, and investors were already pressing for an emergency meeting. My assistant, Janet, called me at 6 a.m. saying there were over 50 journalists at the corporate building entrance, and the communications team was in total panic. Joe Martinez, my partner and CFO, sent a direct message. "Dude, you screwed everything up. We need to talk urgently." It was surreal how one night of entertainment had turned into the biggest crisis of my business career. But what haunted me most wasn't the professional chaos. It was the certainty that I had hurt the only person who really mattered. Megan had always been my anchor, my partner in all moments. She was with me when I was just a novice programmer with dreams too big, supported me when I mortgaged our first house to invest in Astronomer, and celebrated every victory as if it were her own. Now she was there, devastated, and I was the only one to blame. While the whole world speculated about my personal life, I knew I had lost much more than just privacy. I had lost the trust of the most important person in my life, and honestly, I didn't know if I could get it back. What impressed me most was the speed with which everything spread. In 24 hours, the Kisscam video had gone viral in a way that not even the best algorithms from my company could predict. It was like watching a fire spread in real time, and I couldn't do anything to contain the flames. The memes started appearing. My desperate face became a template for embarrassing situations, and Kristin's reaction became a symbol of when you're caught red-handed. The worst part was that some were genuinely funny, which made everything even more humiliating. My personal life had become public entertainment, and I hated every second of it. Meghan's name change was the first sign that this was going far beyond a simple image crisis. She didn't make any explanatory post, no dramatic outburst. She simply deleted Byron and continued her life as if I had never existed. This sent a clear message to everyone. The marriage was hanging by a thread. The tabloids ran after this information, and within days they already had close sources speculating about a millionaire divorce. The business press began questioning whether personal scandals could affect my leadership at Astronomer, and institutional investors scheduled urgent meetings to discuss corporate governance. Inside the company, the atmosphere became tense in a way I never imagined. Employees who used to greet me with genuine smiles now avoided eye contact in the hallways. Conversations stopped when I passed by, and I could tell everyone was uncomfortable. Kristin suffered the most. She had worked years to build her reputation as a serious and competent professional, and now she was seen only as the other woman. Some people began questioning whether her recent promotions had been based on merit or other reasons. It was unfair because she really was brilliant at what she did, but corporate gossip is ruthless. The board of directors called an emergency meeting for Friday, just 3 days after the incident. Members were clearly divided between those who thought my personal life shouldn't interfere with business and others who argued that CEO scandals can harm the company's reputation. Patricia Wells, our most experienced board member, was direct. "Andy, you built a company based on innovation and trust. Now clients and investors are questioning your judgment. We need a concrete plan to deal with this." It was frustrating to realize that 2 decades of hard work could be tainted by a moment of human vulnerability. Astronomer's stock remained unstable throughout the week. We lost approximately $400 million in market value in the first 5 days, and Wall Street analysts began including leadership risk in their reports about the company. Important corporate clients, like Transglobal Systems, postponed contract renewal meetings, claiming they needed to await situation stabilization. It was surreal how a personal relationship could have such concrete financial ramifications. I had completely underestimated the power of public perception in the business world. The pressure was coming from all sides, but what distressed me most was Meghan's silence. She continued living in our house, but we were like 2 strangers sharing the same space. She would wake up early, do her yoga routine, have breakfast, reading the newspaper, probably seeing the news about us, and leave for work without saying a word. At night, she would dine alone watching Netflix in the living room, while I stayed locked in the office pretending to work, but actually just dwelling on the situation. This silent routine was more torturous than any heated argument, because it showed me that she had given up fighting for us. And maybe deep down I knew she was right to do so. The first thing I did was hire the best crisis management company in New York, Strategic Communications Group, which had already saved several executives' skins in similar situations. Mark Thompson, senior partner at the company, was direct. "Andy, you have 72 hours to shape the narrative before it crystallizes permanently in the public's mind. After that, any attempt to change will be 10 times harder and more expensive." His plan was simple: take partial responsibility, focus on the professional aspect, and divert attention to the company's results. It seemed logical, but I knew that dealing with broken hearts wasn't as simple as dealing with financial spreadsheets. My first public appearance was a calculated disaster. We organized a press conference at Astronomer's headquarters, where I read a statement previously prepared by the PR team. I acknowledge that my personal conduct caused unnecessary embarrassment, and I apologize for any negative impact this may have caused the company and its stakeholders. The words came out of my mouth, but they sounded empty even to myself. Journalists asked direct questions I couldn't answer honestly, and each no comment made me seem more guilty. It was humiliating to pretend I had everything under control, when, in reality, my life was falling apart. The hardest decision was temporarily removing Kristin. She came to my office on a Thursday morning, with that professional posture I knew so well, but there was something broken in her eyes. "Andy, I know I need to step away for a while," she said before I even said anything. "This is hurting you, the company, and honestly, it's destroying me inside." I tried to argue that she wasn't to blame for anything, that I couldn't let her career be sacrificed because of my decisions, but she had already made the decision. 2 weeks of paid leave for personal matters. It was the best way to protect both of us, at least temporarily. Are you enjoying the content? If so, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any stories like this. And don't forget to comment which city you're watching from. What I didn't expect was how her absence would affect my emotional state. Used to seeing her every day discussing projects, sharing small victories and challenges, I suddenly felt completely lost in the corporate environment. It was as if an essential part of my routine had been ripped away. I tried to focus on numbers, strategies, endless meetings with the board, but my mind always went back to her. Where was she? How was she dealing with all this? Did she blame me for destroying her reputation? These questions consumed me during sleepless dawns, while I stayed in the office reviewing reports I already knew by heart. Parallel to that, I tried a more personal approach with Megan. I sent flowers to her office, white roses, her favorites since we met in college. She didn't respond. I tried to reserve a table at Lumiere, the French restaurant, where we had our first date 18 years ago. She didn't show up. I wrote a handwritten letter, something I hadn't done in years, explaining my feelings, asking for a chance to talk. She returned the letter unopened along with a note saying only, "When you decide to be honest with yourself, let me know." Each rejection was like a stab, but at the same time, I knew I deserved every one of them. Specialized media began noticing that my performance as CEO was being affected. I lost 2 important clients because I arrived late to crucial meetings, and during a presentation to investors, I had a complete blank in the middle of explaining our projections for the next quarter. Joe Martinez pulled me aside for a frank conversation. "Dude, you need to pull yourself together. I understand you're going through a difficult situation, but we have 2,400 employees depending on this company. You can't let personal problems sink what we took 20 years to build." He was right, but how do you separate personal from professional when your entire life is interconnected? It was more complex than any algorithm I had ever programmed. The confrontation I so feared finally happened on a Monday night, when I came home and found Megan in the kitchen, preparing chamomile tea, something she only did when extremely nervous. She didn't look up when I entered, just continued stirring the spoon in the cup with mechanical movements. "We need to talk," she said in a voice I didn't recognize, cold, calculated, without any trace of the warm woman I knew. I sat at the kitchen island, trying to maintain composure, but my heart was racing. I knew this conversation would define the rest of our lives, and honestly, I didn't feel prepared for the consequences. She started in a way that caught me completely off guard. "Andy, how long has it been since you looked me in the eyes when we make love?" The question was like a punch to the stomach, because I knew exactly when I had stopped. About 8 months ago, when I began noticing that my mind would fly to other places during our intimate moments. "How long has it been since you asked me how my day was without looking at your phone at the same time? How long has it been since you laughed at my silly jokes?" Each question was a painful revelation of how I had disconnected from our relationship long before Kristin appeared. The betrayal hadn't started that night in Boston. It had started months before, when I stopped being present in my own life. She continued with a surgical coldness that impressed me. "Do you think I didn't notice you coming home with that silly smile after meetings with Kristin? Do you think I didn't notice you started exercising again, using different perfumes, caring about clothes like you hadn't in years?" Megan had always been observant, but I never imagined she was cataloging every change in my behavior. It was scary to realize how much she knew my patterns, and how naive I had been to think I could hide my feelings. She knew everything, and was just waiting for the right moment to confront reality. What hurt me most was when she said, "You know what the saddest part is, Andy? It's not the betrayal itself. It's realizing that you fell in love for the first time in years, and it wasn't with me." She was right, and that truth was sharper than any accusation. I had felt alive again next to Kristin, experienced that adolescent excitement of meeting someone new, that pleasant anxiety of waiting for a message. When was the last time I felt that for Megan? When did our relationship become just a comfortable partnership, a harmonious coexistence but without passion? These questions tormented me because I couldn't remember the exact moment when we stopped being lovers and became just life companions. She then presented her conditions with a clarity that showed she had thought through every detail. "You have a choice to make, Andy. Either you definitively end any kind of relationship with Kristin, go to couples therapy with me, and we spend the next 2 years trying to rebuild what we lost, or you admit you fell in love with her and we ask for divorce civilly." It was an ultimatum, but delivered with a maturity that made me admire her even more. There was no drama, screaming, or emotional blackmail, just two clear options, each with well-defined consequences. She was giving me a chance to choose my future, but also making it clear that she wouldn't accept half measures or lies anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. I stayed there, looking at this woman who had shared the best and worst moments of my life with me, trying to process what she had said. Part of me wanted to immediately say I would choose our story, our 15 years together, our common construction. But there was another part, a part I had been fighting to ignore for months, that knew I couldn't simply erase what I felt for Kristin. "I need time to think," was all I could say, and I saw a shadow of disappointment pass through her eyes. "You have until Friday," she replied, getting up from the table and leaving the untouched cup of tea. "After that, I'll assume you've already made your choice." And she left the kitchen, leaving me alone with the weight of a decision that would change everything. The days following Megan's ultimatum were the most introspective of my adult life. I found myself making mental lists of pros and cons for each decision, as if I were analyzing a business acquisition. But this wasn't an Excel spreadsheet. These were human lives, real feelings, and a future I couldn't visualize clearly. I spent hours walking through astronomers' empty corridors during dawn, trying to find answers that seemed to always be one step ahead of my thoughts. 15 years of history with Megan versus a few months of intense passion with Kristin. Stability versus adventure. Security versus authenticity. How the hell does someone make a decision like this? I tried to make the grand gestures that always worked in romantic movies. I bought tickets to Paris, the city where Megan and I spent our honeymoon, and left the tickets on her bed with a note. "Let's start over where it all began." She returned the tickets the next day with a single word written on the envelope: pathetic. I organized a surprise dinner at home with the private chef we hired for special celebrations, flowers everywhere, playlist with songs that marked our relationship. She arrived, looked at everything, gave me a sad smile and said, "Andy, you didn't understand anything. I don't want expensive gestures. I want honesty." And she went upstairs, leaving me alone with a table set for two and the certainty that I was approaching everything wrong. The inconvenient truth I was avoiding facing was that my passion for Kristin hadn't diminished one bit during those 2 weeks. If anything, her absence had intensified my feelings. I dreamed about her, woke up thinking about her, and during the day created mental excuses to pass by the HR department, even knowing she wasn't there. It was obsessive, immature, and completely irrational. Exactly the opposite of everything I represented as CEO and as a husband, but it was genuine in a way I hadn't experienced in years. It was as if a part of me that was asleep had awakened, and now it was impossible to ignore this new version of myself that had emerged. If you're watching the video up to here, comment "obsessive" in the comments. On Wednesday, I broke protocol and called Kristin. She answered on the third ring with a cautious voice that showed she was expecting my call. "Andy, you shouldn't be calling me," was the first thing she said. But she didn't hang up. We talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, about how she was dealing with the situation, about the books she was reading during her leave, about her plans for the future. We didn't talk about us directly, but there was an intimacy in the conversation that made me realize how much I missed our connection. When we hung up, I knew I was more confused than before, because that call had confirmed that my feelings for her were real and deep. The pressure began affecting even my physical performance. I stopped sleeping adequately, lost about 5 pounds, and my assistant Janet commented that I had a concerning appearance. During a meeting with investors on Thursday, I had to leave in the middle of the presentation because I felt an anxiety attack coming. It was the first time in my life that my body was physically reacting to emotional stress, and that scared me deeply. I had always prided myself on being able to separate feelings from practical decisions, but now I realized I was completely vulnerable and human in a way I had never experienced. The question that tormented me most wasn't, who do I choose but rather, who am I really? For 15 years, I had built an identity as a dedicated husband, respected CEO, stable and reliable man. Now, at 42, I was discovering aspects of myself I didn't know existed. Had I always been this passionate and impulsive person, just repressing these traits for social convenience? Or was I going through some kind of cliché midlife crisis? Friday was approaching quickly, and I still didn't have clear answers. What I knew was that regardless of the decision I made, a part of my life would end forever, and I wasn't prepared to deal with the consequences of either option. Friday arrived like an inevitable tsunami. I woke up at 5 a.m. with the feeling that my life was about to be divided into before and after this day. Megan had already left for her run. Her morning routine had become a way to avoid any unnecessary interaction with me, and I was alone in the kitchen, drinking coffee and looking at my phone that wouldn't stop vibrating with work messages. But my mind was somewhere else completely. During the night, I had made a decision that even I couldn't believe. I was going to meet Kristin first, before giving any answer to Megan. I needed to look into her eyes and be sure of what I really felt, because a choice like this couldn't be based only on memories and fantasies. I called Kristin at 8 a.m. and asked to meet in Central Park, away from curious eyes and indiscreet cameras. She hesitated, said she didn't think it was a good idea, but agreed when I explained I needed clarity before making the most important decision of my life. When I saw her walking toward the bench near the lake, in that red coat that highlighted her brown hair, I felt a pang in my chest that confirmed everything I was trying to deny. She was thinner, with dark circles that showed she wasn't sleeping well either, but it was still impossible to ignore the attraction I felt for her. We sat in silence for a few minutes, just watching the ducks in the lake, before she finally asked, "Andy, what are we doing here?" The conversation that followed was the most honest of my adult life. I told her about Megan's ultimatum, about my mental confusion, about how I felt torn between loyalty and passion. She listened without interrupting, but when I finished, her response caught me off guard. "Andy, you're being selfish. You're trying to use me as validation for a decision only you can make." She was right, and that hurt. I won't be your escape valve from a marriage you were already sabotaging for months. If you choose to break up with Megan, it has to be because you really don't want to be married anymore, not because you fell in love with me. Her maturity impressed me, and at the same time made me realize how immature I was being in this whole situation. She continued, looking directly into my eyes. "You know what bothers me most? You're treating this as if it were a decision between two companies to invest in. But these are people, Andy. It's me, who will have to live with the label of homewrecker for the rest of my career. It's Megan, who deserves someone who chooses her genuinely, not out of obligation or guilt." Each word was like a revelation about my own insensitivity. I was so focused on my own feelings and dilemmas that I hadn't fully considered the impact of my decisions on the lives of these two extraordinary women. It was an empathy lesson I should have learned long ago. When we said goodbye, she gave me a kiss on the cheek and said something that completely changed my perspective. "Whatever your decision, Andy, make sure you're being true to yourself. Don't make a choice out of fear of consequences or social pressure. Make it because it's who you really want to be." I went home with that phrase echoing in my head, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange clarity. It wasn't about choosing between two women. It was about choosing what kind of man I wanted to be from then on. Did I want to be someone who settles in a comfortable but passionless relationship, or someone who has the courage to seek authenticity, even if it means hurting people I love? When Megan came home at 7 p.m., I was sitting in the living room with two envelopes on the coffee table. One contained the papers our lawyer had prepared for consensual divorce. The other contained a detailed schedule for couples therapy and a plan to rebuild our relationship. She looked at the envelopes, then at me, and asked, "What's your choice, Andy?" I took a deep breath and said, "Actually, Megan, I want you to choose first. After everything that happened, after all the pain I caused, do you still want to try to save our marriage? Because if the answer is no, that will make my decision much easier." The silence that followed was endless, and I knew that regardless of her answer, our lives would never be the same again. It was the end of an era, and I still didn't know if I was prepared for what would come next. And so we reached the moment of truth, where Andy Byron needed to choose between the security of the known and the uncertainty of the authentic. But the question that remains is, what choice did Megan make first? Did she still want to fight for the marriage, or had she completely given up? And more importantly, could Andy live with the consequences of whatever decision he made? This story makes us reflect on how many times we also live on autopilot in our relationships, losing genuine connection in the midst of routine. Would you recognize the signs that you're falling in love with another person before it's too late? What would you do in Andy's place? Would you choose stability or follow your heart? Comment below your opinion about this situation, and tell me what other complex relationship stories you'd like to see here on the channel. Subscribe to follow more stories that will make you question your own choices. Activate notifications so you don't miss any episodes.